This talk is going to be a bit different. It is not obviously in any way a talk about crypto at all. It really is just an introduction to me. I'm a very unusual person, and the way that I conceive of my own identity. I think it's just pretty different, and I think it'll be probably pretty interesting to some folks. So I kind of encourage you to think of this as like a palate cleanser. We've got lots of time to talk about crypto and the exciting world that we are going to build, but I think we also have got an opportunity as we're transforming everything to transform ourselves. So think of this as a little exploration of a different way to conceptualize self. Um, so I'm going to start by just saying I'm a multiple. I really don't identify as being like a single individual. If you think about the term individual, it really means impossible to divide, right? Like unitary, like you have a single soul, you're atomic, you're unsplittable. And that's kind of a weird concept, because if you look around the world, you realize not many things are actually like that. Pretty much everything that is interesting in the world turns out to be some kind of fractal metaposition. You can look at America as being individual, but then you're like, wait, no, there's Democrats, there's Republicans, there's elites, there's the South, the North, the West. I think whenever you look at a complex or interesting system in the world, you wind up finding ways to split into smaller and smaller pieces. And by splitting it into these smaller pieces, you also come to understand it a lot more clearly. And I think the same is true of people. Individual humans are some of the most complex and interesting systems in the world. So I think that we actually have the potential to, as this Walt Whitman quote goes, contains multitudes. So I consider myself a mixture of Dande and Lion. Right now, hi, I'm Dande. As Dande, I took us a couple photos here that I think are sort of particularly me. I'm sweet, I'm goofy, I'm curious, and some of my talents involve connecting with people, exploring, whether it's wandering around the campus of a new university and striking up conversations, or wandering around the woods, finding all kinds of interesting plants and creatures. And I'm pretty good at empathetically connecting with people, kind of seeing where they're at, what they're feeling, how they wish they could be. And on the other hand, hi, I'm Lion. Again, a couple photos. As Lion, I'll first note that I speak in a different vocal register. Like if you're auditorily perceptive, you may have noticed that my voice shifted down a bit. As Lion, I'm ambitious, I'm driven, strategic. I really like negotiating. I really like coming up with and executing strategies, whether it's figuring out how to drive a partnership between two projects, or figuring out how to get the best possible job offer from my preferred employer. I love economics. I love programming. I would say a lot of my crypto nerdery resides as Lion. Now, in the past, it gets kind of a pain to be communicating to people hi, as Lion, I'm saying this, or hi, as Dande, I'm saying that. And so my dear friend LB and I came up with pronouns that are kind of not exactly first and second person gendered pronouns. It's ironic that as a genderqueer person who uses they them pronouns, that I'm coming up with new pronouns, but there you have it. So we've come up with K pronouns for the kind of masculine side. I would generally say that Lion is more masculine and Dande is more feminine. So K pronouns, you can think K as in killer, tough, aggressive, forceful. K pronouns designate, for me, Lion. So I would say Kai am Lion. Someone could say Ku as Lion, or doing X, Y, and Z. And then conversely, as Dande, I would say, hello, Zym Dande. Or you could say hey, does you like this flower? And I would be yes, I like this flower very much. It's quite pretty. So I'm just going to use these, and this is a system that I've just come to mostly use without explaining. I'm explaining up front here because it's this talk, but I feel like it's like learning any other language or diving into a new fiction universe that's got all kinds of new concepts and magic. Sometimes it helps to just do without needing to explain everything. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this dualism of being two people. And one thing that's quite interesting, and this is Lion again, is that it actually maps really well onto the classic left and right brain distinction, right? So you have this idea that and just to start with the anatomy of the brain, your brain physically is two hemispheres, that are fairly like discontinuous, like disconnected pieces of brain matter that are connected by a band in the middle called the corpus callosum. And I haven't looked super deeply into the research, but there's a broadly accepted consensus that these two sides of the brain are kind of differentially specialized. Where one side, the left side, is more logical, it's more verbal, it's more like empirical. And the other side, the right side, is more emotional, it's more intuitive, it's more creative, it's less verbal, less logical. And appropriately enough, like I think lion really is for me the left side of the brain, and dandy is the right side. And in this case, like as lion, I really like this left image because it's got tons of information and it's really like specific and concrete. And as dandy, I like the right image because it's just much more evocative, and I like the cool patterns on the right side in particular. Like the circuit board is cool too, but I really like these patterns on the right. There actually has been some amount of actual research on people who have had severed corpus callosa. So that is to say, the band of neural tissue that's connecting the left and the right side of the brain has been cut. And we've done this on a number of people because there are certain kinds of seizures that you can like mitigate the symptoms of the seizures by cutting. And also, I think that we're just like weirdly into like chopping up brains, you know, like lobotomies, severed corpus callosa. Anyway, in people with severed corpus callosa, we've actually experimentally found that the two halves of the brain can sustain separate narratives. And so they've done studies, and I'm thinking of this particular experiment on an Italian teenager who had a severed corpus callosa, and they would put a question in front of either the left eye or the right eye, so that only one side of the brain would see the question. And because the corpus callosa was severed, the information wouldn't propagate to the other side of the brain. And they would ask this kid something like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the left side of the brain would give really realistic answers. You know, like, oh, I want to be like a firefighter. I want to be like an emergency medical technician. And the right side of the brain would give these sort of more fantastical but emotionally exciting answers, like, oh, I want to be a race car driver. So I think that's just like a really interesting, really empirical demonstration of the fact that you actually can just have separate perspectives and separate narratives in your separate halves of the brain. Now I'll go a bit to origins. So I think that for me, there was a very clear shift between being sort of primarily dandy when I was young to being primarily lion in my like adolescence onward. And so I've got here a photo of four high school like ID cards, and they reissued me a new card every year. And you can see that in these top two photos, let me put on a pointer. You can see in these top two photos, I basically look like a super like nerdy kind of timid Asian kid. And then in these bottom two photos, I'm like suddenly like hard to say exactly how, other than the fact that I dropped the glasses, but my face looks different. It like seems kind of like wider. I seem more masculine. I seem like discontinuously older. And I think that this really concretely corresponded to me shifting from having dandy front and be like my kind of like foreground personality to having lion be my foreground personality. And I think what really happened there is that in the beginning, like, you know, as dandy, I was just a sweet little kid bopping around. I like wanted to play video games. I wanted to read science fiction. And I wanted to be like nice to people and like make friends. And in the tough world of, you know, schoolyard politics, this was a really bad strategy. And I just got bullied and picked on and called gay a lot. And as lion, I really didn't like that. So at a certain point, and I really associate this with having played a lot of World of Warcraft in around like 8th and 9th grade. But at a certain point, Kai, which is say lion, just kind of took charge and like pushed to the foreground and completely changed our social strategy. Went much more for being like assertive, like trying to be alpha, like trying to gain social status, much less on the like vulnerability and sweetness side. And it actually did work pretty well as far as becoming more popular, but at what cost? And that kind of brings me to the theme of dissonance, which is, I think that we live in a society that really values, you know, masculinity. It really values being logical. It really values getting access to resources, especially money. And especially for people, boys or people who are assigned male at birth, or as I like to say, penis bearers, there's a very strong pressure to like conform to a masculine archetype and stereotype. And for me, like as Lion, like I can do that pretty well. I'm like happy to be masculine. I'm happy to take up space. I'm happy to be assertive and to try to dominate people. And Dandy is deeply uncomfortable with all those things. And so for a long time, I kind of felt like the existence of Dandy was inherently shameful because Dandy uh, doesn't like perform masculinity well at all, and Dandy is vulnerable and Dandy is emotional, and I felt like that really like made me less of a man and made me less worthy of my own respect. And so for many years, probably from like around being like 14 through being around maybe 25 or 26, I really like tried to pretend Dandy didn't exist and like kind of like shove Dandy into a corner of my mind where it's kind of like they could like be on the inside, like looking out, but like would never get seen by the rest of the world because it just felt really important to me to be like masculine, to be strong, to be tough. And speaking as Dandy, that pretty much sucked, like, and it sucked because I think it sucks to be like kind of shoved into a prison in your mind in any case. And it also sucked because Lion like was not very good at doing a lot of things that I value, which say like empathy, like being kind to people, treating friends well and like maintaining like long-term relationships and watching out for them. Like Lion is a lot more mercenary. Lion is like, okay, like what are you going to do for me, this year? Why are you still relevant in my life? And Lion is very willing to kind of like cut people out if they just don't seem like relevant or important anymore. And it like kind of torched a lot of relationships that I would have really liked to have like saved and invested in, and Lion was just very willing to like cut them away. um, this kind of gets to the theme of relationships. On the one hand, there's a relationship between me and Lion, which I think is a relationship that's really been improving a lot, especially in the past 5 years, since there started to be like really space for recognizing Z as existing. And I would say that now, like Lion and I have quite a good relationship where, on the one hand, I really appreciate having Lion around because I kind of, there's this movie Lost in Space. I should have put that image in this slide actually. There's this movie Lost in Space, and it came out in the 90s, and it's about these guys who go on, an adventure in outer space, and they get lost, their ship is in the wrong place, and they find all kinds of crazy alien spiders. And there's this one character who's the sort of like masculine, like white man who's like the lead, like tough, like protagonist. And he's got this armor, this like super futuristic armor where he can like push a button, and then he's just dressed like normally, but he pushes the button, and this like sheet of like metal like rolls up the surface of his body and like comes up his back of his neck and like turns into a visor. And then he like pulls out this giant gun, and he's just got a giant gun and is covered in metal armor, so he can fight the spiders. And I feel like having Lion is kind of like having that button where I can be bopping around the world, just like easy as you please, hanging out with people, connecting with people. And then I know that if someone wanted to fuck with me, as people sometimes do want to fuck with people who just seem innocent and sweet and kind, then I can push the Lion button and immediately just be like a very like resourced, very assertive, very like confident like man, and just like know how to tell people to fuck off and get the fuck out of my way. So I really appreciate that. And at the same time, I know that Lion is pretty under resourced in terms of a lot of like let's say diffusing emotional conflict, right? There's like a conflict where like I or Lion feels like really hurt or offended by a friend. Lion's instinct will usually be to like try to win an argument intellectually or to like escalate in some kind of power dimension, which is often a really bad move when dealing with emotional conflict. And so think that it's pretty valuable that I'm around to help like diffuse things emotionally rather than just trying to make it into some kind of power game. The other thing that's cool is that I can just support kind of twice as many relationships because there are two sides of myself. And so it's definitely the case that I have some relationships where it's like Lion really likes this person and I don't hugely care for them. Like I would veto people who I thought were like actively shitty. But I have some friends where like I don't think that they're like the most interesting person emotionally, but Lion thinks they're really intellectually interesting, and that's fine. And conversely, there are relationships where Lion is not that interested because they're just not doing like super interesting or fascinating things in like a material sense with their life. But whereas I think they're really cool on like a relationship or emotional sense. So I just appreciate like it's like kind of having twice as many like opportunities to connect. And of course, the really interesting relationships are ones where both Lion and I really like are invested in a relationship with someone, but for different reasons. Uh, that actually all kind of like address the theme of collaboration as well, which is, but I think to give a really specific example of collaboration, one of the issues that I as Dandy run into is that I really want to trust people. I really want to see the best in people. I really want to like be present with someone in imagining their best self and kind of helping like manifest that into reality by believing in it. And that can lead me into trouble where I just trust people prematurely. I trust people who didn't actually warrant that trust because I wanted to see the best in them. And conversely, Lion here, I would say that my issue more is on the side of skepticism, on the side of being very, very just like very judgmental of people. I really like expect people around me to be pretty fucking on it if I'm going to spend meaningful time with them because I'm a demanding and exacting person. And I think that can lead me astray sometimes in being like too harsh with people and being too willing to write them off. And so in the past, when I didn't have good integration between Dandy and Lion, it would sort of be either one or the other. Either I was way too trusting and would overextend in like bad ways, or I'm way too skeptical and I'll like slice people with the blade of my intellect without really giving them a chance. And so I'm working on like finding that balance where I can kind of simultaneously hold where someone is and where they could be in a way that lets me like be realistic in how I'm going to engage with them, but also support them in growth. Yeah, so I think that's about the duration of my presentation. And if people have any questions, I would be delighted to take them. Oh, one more thing I'll say is I think that for me, I think just having spent a lot of time paying attention to other humans, I think that this is actually pretty common. It's rooted in the biology of the brain, and it's like I see a lot of ways in which other people kind of have dualities inside them and have different sides of themselves. But I think that society has really taught people to repress that, right? Because it's like, are you like schizo? Are you crazy? Do you have like BPD or something? It's really stigmatized to have different sides. And that doesn't mean that people won't have different sides. It just means that they'll hide them. For me, I found that really like leaning into being multipolar to being a multipole has been very empowering. I hope I've made that point clear. I think that a huge step in my own journey was letting Dandy and Lion have different names, because by naming things, you kind of give them space to exist. You give them definition. I think it's a weird way, weirdly similar to how like creating an NFT for something kind of makes that art take on a life for its own. I think that for me, like having names for Dandy and Lion, let those sides of myself take on lives of their own. So I think that if this is a direction that you'd be interested in exploring for yourself, I think coming up with names is like a ritual of summoning.
Yeah, I think it's very empowering, and I myself have been going by Penguin for over 20 years now. So I know exactly what you mean about kind of like it's like reclaiming your identity, and I've always respected and appreciated the multiple that you have, and kind of that appreciation that you bring to everyone. You're so talented, and it sucks and it's terrible to hear the struggles that we all have had in the past. And as Vinay says, in the past, like the war against nerds is pretty much like a war against autism or people that don't really fit in as well. And so it's great to see that we're reclaiming our own identity and empowering each other, and it doesn't matter what other people think.